Hi, I'm Mike Stoll. Welcome to the MBA Business Boot Camp in Management. What we're going to do is help prepare you to be successful in the management courses that you'll be taking in the MBA program. We're going to give you some basic concepts and information that's going to get you up to speed and make the classes more enjoyable and hopefully make you more successful. Let's get to it. Right now, I'm joined by Dr. Craig Seal. Dr. Seal is a professor of management here in the College of Business and Public Administration, and he's also the recipient of our Outstanding Teaching Award in 2013, so he's an outstanding instructor. Dr. Seal is also a well-respected researcher in the area of emotional intelligence, and we're going to talk to him about that topic today. So Craig, tell us, what is this emotional intelligence stuff?
That's a really good question, Mike, because it depends on the author. The field itself is very broad, and each author has their own particular take on the concept of emotional intelligence. From a very general standpoint, it's basically this set of abilities, behaviors, and traits that different individuals have. And so most of the different theorists in emotional intelligence will take one of those takes, either focusing on the ability, the behavior model, or the trait model. In a more macro sense, in stepping back, it's really this idea of an integration of emotion and intelligence. If you think of intelligence as problem solving, our capability to overcome problems, whereas emotions are sort of our reaction to problems, and if you put the two of them together, understanding that what happens to you is going to elicit information which you're going to react to, and then you're going to have to solve that potential problem. Putting emotions with intelligence ideally would allow you to think clearer, and at the same time, thinking clearer would allow you to have more appropriate emotions to better be able to solve problems.
Interesting. Now, you've done work in this area in terms of research. How does your work fit within the kind of the broader context of what people have historically said, a manager's got good soft skills?
Yes, this whole human relations movement, which really started in much of the OB, and so there's different takes on this, of which EI is a piece of sort of the broader social intelligence, or what we call soft skills, people looking at things from influence orientation to personality theory. My work in particular based on the idea of these personal and interpersonal competence. And so what we've done in terms of myself and some of my fellow researchers is look at this idea of being self-aware, being considerate of other people, and being able to connect and build relationships with them, and then using that awareness, that connection and consideration to then being able to influence. What we find is that people often get stymied and they don't get the results they want. And usually you can trace it back to, well, you didn't take their perspective, or you didn't have a good relationship, or you weren't aware of your own feelings, or you didn't take appropriate action. And so the model itself is designed within this broader scope of soft skills, and the assumption, the theory that we're working with is the idea that those who are better in capacity in these skills would potentially lower conflict in organizations and raise communication levels and hopefully also get the things that they want.
Interesting. Now, oftentimes in organizations, people get promoted because they get things done. They're good at doing things. They've got a strong ability to see the marketplace evolving, or they've got good skills in managing resources. But what's the difference between this idea of abilities and skills? I mean, how do you sort that out?
It's a difficult transition to make between the two of them, and at the margins there's not a lot of difference between them. But from more of an archetype standpoint, abilities are generally inherited. So those are your natural genetic capacity to do something. Some people are simply stronger, or taller, or faster. And some people in the world of work are simply a little smarter, remember a little better, or are willing to put themselves at risk more. So that's the ability side. The skill side is being able to apply different knowledge to be able to impact. And so you can be naturally gifted at sales, but there are sales skills and traits and techniques that you can learn to hone those. A good example here is we have the Toastmasters clubs for our students, which are graduate and undergraduate. And so some people are really good at public speaking, but Toastmasters applies the skill of learning how to be a better public speaker. And so the idea is the combination of the two is what becomes really powerful.
So one could be naturally an extroverted person, but may not necessarily be a gifted speaker, but they can acquire the skill, and maybe it's a little bit easier because they have no problem getting in front of people. And
yes, and just because you're extroverted doesn't mean people like you or want to do what you want. The same regard, just because you're introverted doesn't mean you can't occasionally lead quietly.
Interesting. Now, when we look at skills and abilities, and then ultimately when we look at emotional intelligence, can this stuff actually be measured? Is there a way to keep track of all this?
Well, that's the million-dollar question, and it's a difficult one. Much of the social science, we rely on self-report, which is historically inaccurate, although there are certain trends that you can pick up from self-report. Some of the field in terms of emotional intelligence has started to look at 360, so not just your reports on your skills, but getting other people to report on them. Also, some nuances to that is really asking people to think not what they think, but what do they think others think about them. And that subtle shift helps to increase some of the reliability and validity of the measures. But this is an ongoing debate. Again, each author has a different take on it, and so there are some real legitimate concerns of how well can we measure this construct we call emotional intelligence.
Interesting. Now, if I'm a manager in an organization, many of our students are working or they aspire to be managers and leaders in an organization, and you've alluded to the fact that it's not just about knowledge, skills, and abilities, but there's this emotional intelligence piece. How do I develop this emotional intelligence? What do I do to make myself better at that? If that's going to make me a better manager, how do I develop that?
Well, the measurement's the million-dollar question. This is the billion-dollar question, literally, because of the consulting and training industry. And to the capacity that can you actually develop these kinds of skills, abilities, and traits. There is an assumption that there is a normal progression as people mature. And so as people get older, as they become more self-aware, as they become more broader in their experiences, that normally the idea of emotional intelligence will get stronger naturally over time. And you would see a rapid growth sort of from teenagers all the way up through adulthood, where you'd see probably the most change. Question is, can we impact that arc, and can we make it go up higher? And several researchers have some very compelling ideas about how to potentially do that. One of them, quite frankly, is just self-awareness. Going through some of the measurements, knowing what some of your strengths are and some of your weaknesses are, that by itself can help to improve your potential overall emotional intelligence. Some of the more interesting things that have started to happen as well is this idea of coaching. And so part of development is by coaching and helping others, that process of being the coach, not the coachee, but the person actually doing the coaching, that they actually develop, because they're having to use a lot of these skills of self-awareness, consideration, and connection in working with another person. And so it's coaches themselves that may actually develop this much stronger than those who don't go through some kind of coaching process.
Interesting. So if I'm a kind of a new MBA graduate and I'm in my mid-20s, late 20s, early 30s, kind of by what you said earlier, I may not be sort of mature enough yet or seasoned enough yet to have high levels of emotional intelligence in general. And so then this coaching model or having some mentoring and creating this self-awareness and this feedback mechanism sounds like it would be an important aspect of organizations.
It's critical. Some of the things I've done in some of my work and some of my coursework before is peer coaching, which is essential to individuals to have somebody else at their level that can give them some feedback on how they're doing. But also within that, as you mentioned, is the mentoring, which is the step above. Somebody within your organization that can tell you when you need to tone it down, and when you need to bring it up. And having that person to help guide you through the organization is critical. So having peers that are willing to give you honest, upfront feedback, as well as having mentors in the organization that will guide your career are critical, both the development of emotional intelligence, but also the ultimate issue in business is greater productivity.
Interesting. This sounds very, and I've talked to people that have said, this sounds very new age-ish. This emotional intelligence. And, business is really about the bottom line. And, while it's nice to motivate, employees, they still have to do the job. And there's, still in some ways, there's still a lot of old school thinking in organizations. So I guess the question I have is, can this emotional intelligence, does it have real impact? In organizations? Does it really make a difference?
And this is where most of the researchers agree. First off, it's not as new age as people may think. Turn of the century, when the intelligence movement came out, this was actually part of social intelligence, one of the original ways of thinking about intelligence. The problem is it's hard. It's hard to measure, and it's hard to develop. And so we moved into more abstract or mechanical intelligence because those, quite frankly, were easier for us to deal with. And so it's been around for a long, long time. Second point is most of the meta-studies looking at measuring emotional intelligence and impact in business shows that there is a clear difference. Companies that are higher in terms of management and emotional intelligence are more productive than those that are not. And the third point we found is that there's this idea of threshold versus excellence. And so to be a good accountant or a good engineer, you have to have a certain level of intelligence, a certain level of competence in your field. But once you've met that threshold, what separates an okay performer from a superstar seems to relate back to these concepts of soft skills or emotional intelligence.
Interesting. So largely overlooked over the years, now playing out in the research, it sounds like for managers to really progress in an organization, they have to have this as a part of their toolkit.
I've talked to a lot of students because my background has been in industry before coming back into academia. And usually I'll start, especially my HR classes, what does it take to get fired? And they always come up with this issues of poor performance. I'm like, no, you upset the wrong person. That's what usually gets you fired. And the same thing with your career going awry is, why am I stuck in middle management? It's because you're not demonstrating, not the technical skills, you've got that, but you're not managing the relationships appropriate. And that's where people get messed up.
So yeah, so it's not the technical skills that really get people. I mean, most people are fairly competent. I mean, there's a few outliers, but it's how they interact with people, how they deal with their supervisor, how they conduct themselves in an organization that really sets them apart.
That's what makes the difference.
Interesting. Now, in terms of your research, what's some of the most interesting things you've learned as a result of doing research in the emotional intelligence area, beyond what you've already talked about?
One of the things that was interesting was the potential overlap between what we're doing and ethics. Some of the things we're finding initially is individuals in our assessment instrument, we look at each of the 4 different levels. So their influence orientation, their self-awareness, their consideration of others, and their connection to others. What we're finding is when there's resonance between those, meaning they're all sort of about the same level, that tends to lead to potentially more ethical kinds of behavior. Whereas when there's dissonance, where somebody's highly self-aware but disconnected from others, or they're highly empathetic to others but they're not good at building relationships, is that where we start to see ethics start to come in, and an issue called responsible leadership start to emerge, where those individuals seem to have more difficulty connecting the dots and being more authentic in their interactions with others. Interesting.
Now, is it fair to say that this concept, even though it's kind of been hot lately, that this concept of emotional intelligence, is it fair to say that an average MBA program probably isn't talking a lot about emotional intelligence?
No, they're really not. There are a few key programs that do use some of the concepts of emotional intelligence as a base. Most MBA programs still are following, which is in fairness, a more traditional model. And so these kinds of more innovative soft skills approaches are still not the norm in terms of what you're seeing in graduate programs.
But it sounds like what the research is telling us and your experience, and I think probably as a practitioner myself, having spent many years in industry, I think our research tells us that, yeah, absolutely, the soft skills is the difference between, for careers, the difference between success and maybe mediocrity or even failure.
And this is key for students coming through these kinds of programs. You're going to forget some of the authors. You're going to forget some of the dates. But if we can teach you to expand your capacity to work with others, that will always stay with you.
Now, if I'm a student in your class, I take your MBA class, and I'll be exposed to this concept of emotional intelligence. But it goes beyond that. Is there some assessment that I do that helps me become a little bit more aware of that?
What I do in my class is there's some assessments, there's some readings, but my role as an instructor is to some extent raise students' anxiety and to put them in situations in a more safe place in class, working with teams, working with groups so that they can tackle some of these issues now, so that later when the stakes are much higher, their capacity has been developed and built so that they'll be better able to manage those environmental situations.
So they're really getting some experiential activity as it relates to emotional intelligence in a safe environment where failure is okay and learning is at a premium. Interesting. This is a fascinating topic because, as I said before, even though I said it was kind of a new agey, I mean, if I talked about this concept with some of the prior generation of managers, they would have just said, oh, it's not important. But I think our experience is telling us that, for you really to be successful, you've got to be tuned into this kind of stuff. And it sounds like the research is continuing to support this. Is there anything new or exciting that you're going to be pursuing in the research area as it relates to emotional intelligence?
For me, I'm going to continue to work on the coaching aspect and trying to develop coaching models. We're doing some work with non-traditional students in terms of providing coaching and mentoring support for them, because we find with some of our first generation students in particular, they don't have the same sort of social capital that other students would have available to them. Their parents didn't go to college, often their families don't understand what the commitment's going to require for them. So being able to work more with non-traditional students that may be at a disadvantage out of the gate without that social capital, and see if these kinds of principles, both the mentoring and coaching, can really make a difference for them, both in both in succeeding in the programs, but really thriving and doing well and getting through.
So there are some, as you alluded to earlier, there are some people that maybe naturally have more emotional intelligence at a certain stage of their development than others because of nurturing or context or experience?
There could be a combination of differing levels of emotional intelligence, but also differing levels of potential support. And those support structures are hopefully what we would like to find those who are high in EI would start to develop and nurture.
Okay, excellent. This is a fascinating topic, and so although it's not something that is a requirement for students to be prepared for our organizational behavior class, I think more and more it's becoming super important to their careers, and they'll learn about it in a little bit more detail as they take the courses. But it's a good sort of interesting topic to catch their attention at the start.
Yes.
So. Craig, thanks again for joining us today and sharing that really great insight on the topic of emotional intelligence. Now, your next step is to go to the voice-guided PowerPoint. In that PowerPoint, which will take about 15-20 minutes to complete, you're going to learn more basic fundamental management and organizational behavior concepts. And the idea is that those concepts will provide the foundation of knowledge for you to be successful in the MBA Essentials courses, in particular the Management 601 course.